A new family, old shadows. The living room was filled with golden evening light, the day Emily officially became a part of the Parker family. To an outsider, everything seemed perfect. The well-manicured lawn, visible through polished windows. The gentle laughter of her adoptive parents, Sheila and David, and the promise of a fresh start in their quaint suburban home. But for Emily, now 16, the air was thick with unspoken expectations and a persistent sense of displacement that gnawed at her heart. Emily was adopted when she was only 6 years old. Her earliest memories blurred by foster homes and the faces of strangers who never stayed long enough to become family. The Parkers had given her stability, a room of her own with powder blue walls, a spot at the dinner table, even a monogrammed stocking at Christmas. Still, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she was always slightly out of sync, as if she were reading lines in a play written for someone else. Her adoptive sister, Jessica, seemed the central character in every family scenario. Jessica, 2 years her senior, exuded the effortless confidence of someone who had always belonged. She was the shining star, her trophies from dance competitions and honor roll certificates crowding the shelves in the family den. Their parents' eyes sparkled with pride at her achievements. The home echoed with her laughter, her opinions, her stories. At first, Emily tried hard to mimic Jessica. She joined clubs at school, signed up for extracurriculars, even attempted ballet for a semester, until the stiffness of her movements drew polite but disappointed sighs from Sheila. Jessica never openly excluded Emily, but there was an easy warmth she reserved for her friends and parents that she never extended to her adopted sister. Their conversations were polite, often stilted, and always underlined by the differences between them. Mealtimes were the most difficult. The Parkers followed an unspoken script. David would ask about Jessica's classes, Sheila would plan Jessica's weekend activities, and Emily would quietly report on her day, her accomplishments rarely eliciting more than a distracted, "That's nice, honey." There was never outright cruelty, just a persistent, chilly indifference, subtle enough to make Emily doubt her own perceptions. At school, the differences became even more pronounced. Teachers seemed to sense the Parker mold Jessica embodied, and Emily, despite her efforts, could never quite fit in the same way. Sometimes she wondered if there was something about her posture, her faded accent, the way she hesitated before answering questions in class, that signaled to everyone that she didn't really belong. Nights were the loneliest. Emily would lie in bed, listening to the hum of distant traffic and the muffled laughter drifting from Jessica's room, lost between gratitude for the life she'd been given and the aching sense that she was, and might always be, the outsider in her own home. She wanted desperately to prove her worth, to be seen as more than a charity case, but the shadow of Jessica's presence seemed to eclipse every spark of individuality Emily managed to muster. The sense of invisibility, of being the other, began to take root. Not as a sudden realization, but as a steady, growing ache, coloring every moment with doubt. Still, Emily clung to the hope that one day she would find her place, not just in the Parker household, but in the world. As she looked around at the framed family photos on the living room mantel, she wondered what it would feel like to be truly chosen, not out of obligation or pity, but out of love. For now, she remained an observer, quietly longing for a shift in the script, a chance for her voice to finally be heard. Unsettled days, the first weeks of junior year, felt like one endless attempt at blending in for Emily. Sunrise came with a heaviness. She would stare at the ceiling before getting up, collecting herself to face a world that seemed determined to keep her at its margins. The Parker household was abuzz with Jessica's college prep and social plans, her presence too large and bright to ignore. But the daylight hours brought even sharper reminders that Emily's place, at home, at school, in the world, remained uncertain. School hallways were a gauntlet. Emily's new classmates at Maplewood High were polite, smiling in the way people do when they're not really looking at you. Lunches in the crowded cafeteria were far from the communal scenes in television dramas. Emily often found herself drifting at the edges of tightly woven groups, her tray in hand, waiting for anyone to wave her over, but rarely being given that welcome. The few friends she'd cautiously approached seemed to lose interest after a week or two, choosing instead to side with those who found Emily different. Some would whisper, not loud enough for the teachers to hear, but enough for Emily to notice. It wasn't outright bullying. No one tripped her in the halls or scrawled insults in her notebooks, but rather a slow, subtle campaign of exclusion. People's invitations to the mall or weekend parties somehow always skipped her, even if she stood right there. Her locker was next to Olivia Markham's, one of the more popular girls in their grade. Olivia greeted Emily cheerfully at first, but after a few days, her hellos turned into curt nods, her smile vanishing almost overnight. Emily couldn't pinpoint why. She wondered if there was a story about her circulating among the students, something whispered just out of earshot. At home, the dynamic was equally uneasy. Jessica, glowing with popularity herself, occasionally asked how things were going at school, but her words were laced with an edge Emily couldn't quite place. In front of their parents, Jessica offered praise or mild encouragement. Emily's really trying with swimming club. But in private, her tone cooled. Comments like, "You just have to put yourself out there more," or a clipped, "Don't take it so seriously, people aren't thinking about you that much," made Emily feel not only unloved, but also at fault for her own loneliness. Small misunderstandings began to add up. During a group science project, a piece of equipment broke unexpectedly. Though no one saw her touch it, the group's leader stared at Emily for an uncomfortable moment before quietly suggesting, "Let's be more careful, everyone." In English class, when a paper disappeared from the teacher's desk, a few glances darted to Emily, the new kid, the outsider. With each passing week, more students seemed to offer her the same cautious distance, as if her presence was risky. Afternoons at home were quieter. Emily walked the suburban streets, her headphones a shield against uncomfortable memories. Sometimes she returned to find Jessica with friends, their laughter spilling warmly into the kitchen. They would greet her, but conversation quickly shifted to inside jokes and plans Emily wasn't a part of. Once, she heard her name said in a low voice as she passed by, followed by a burst of giggles. That sting lingered for days. Teachers, too, seemed to treat her with a detached professionalism. They praised Jessica in glowing terms, but only ever described Emily as quiet or reserved. Emily tried to stay out of trouble, but even her smallest mistakes, like arriving a minute late to class or forgetting to raise her hand, were noticed and corrected. Nights brought no peace. Emily's mind replayed every stilted interaction, every sideways glance, every moment that sharpened her sense of difference. Still, as the days passed, she slowly realized there was a pattern. Small incidents, misunderstandings, and rumors all seemed to circle back to her. She began to sense that someone or something was quietly orchestrating these shadows, ensuring her days at Maplewood remained anything but peaceful. The stain that wouldn't fade. The storm arrived on a Tuesday, unexpected and all-consuming. That morning started quietly. sunlight painting stripes across the kitchen floor as Emily ate her cereal in silence. The clink of her spoon, the only sound, joining Jessica's animated recount of a successful swim meet. Nothing, in those early moments, hinted at how dramatically her day was about to unravel. It began in biology class during third period. As students filed in, they noticed the model skeleton in the back of the room had been tampered with, bones askew, the skull teetering precariously. Mrs. Bingham, the teacher, frowned deeply and scanned the room. Without warning, she announced that important materials from her desk were missing as well, including an answer key for the upcoming midterm. Whispers rippled through the classroom. Not more than an hour later, word spread that someone had broken into the faculty lounge, leaving a mess of papers and a half-eaten sandwich behind. By lunch, rumors were flying. Someone had vandalized the biology room. Someone had stolen from teachers. Someone had done both. And somehow, that someone was rapidly becoming Emily Parker. First, it was the suspicious glances. Then, as Emily picked up her lunch tray, Olivia Markham and her friends shifted aside, whispering not so quietly. "I heard she was the last one in the biology room. Didn't she look nervous this morning?" The cafeteria seemed to shrink. Every gaze, a silent accusation. Emily's appetite dissolved in her throat. During fifth period, an office aide appeared at the doorway, calling Emily's name in front of the entire class. Emily's heart hammered as she gathered her things, feeling every pair of eyes following her. In the main office, Mrs. Saunders, the assistant principal, closed the door with a soft click and fixed Emily with a measured, professional smile. "Emily, we need to speak with you about something that happened today." The conversation was a blur. Questions about her whereabouts before third period, whether she had seen anything unusual, if she knew anything about the missing answer key or the broken skeleton. Emily shook her head, hands trembling, but there was a heavy skepticism in the air. Mrs. Saunders's tone was polite but unwavering, as if she had already decided on Emily's guilt. After school, things spiraled. The story moved fast, especially in today's world of group texts and social media. By dinner time, it seemed the entire student body had weighed in. Comments floated through Emily's phone. Short, sharp messages from classmates she barely knew. Some were biting, some taunting. "Didn't expect that from you. Thought you were quiet, but guess you're just sneaky."
What do you make of this?
Even as she tried to defend herself, the tide was too strong. The hardest blow landed at home. Sheila and David sat Emily down after dinner, faces drawn and tired. Sheila led the conversation, voice trembling with disappointment. "Emily, we want to believe you," she said. "But the school is saying there's circumstantial evidence. You need to be honest with us." David sat silent, jaw tight, nodding along, a picture of concern, but also suspicion. Jessica hovered nearby, arms folded across her chest, brow furrowed in a show of sisterly worry. Her words sounded supportive, but Emily felt a chill in them. "I'm sure you didn't mean for things to get this bad, Em," Jessica said gently, reaching out as if to comfort her. "Maybe you can just tell the truth, so Mom and Dad aren't so upset." The implication was icy, and Emily recoiled inwardly. That night, her world felt impossibly small. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the day's events, searching for where it all began. The sting of injustice was overwhelmed only by confusion. Why her? What evidence did they have? Was someone deliberately setting her up? Or did people simply find it easy to suspect the outsider? The more she thought about it, the more insidious it seemed. As midnight approached, Emily scrolled endlessly through her phone, reading messages she wished she could erase. Friends distanced themselves. Teachers left emails about acceptable conduct, and even her foster parents watched her with wary eyes. She felt the stain of accusation beginning to seep into every part of her life. It was more than an incident. It was becoming her identity, one she could not so easily wash away. Alone in the darkness, Emily resolved to survive this. She tried to recall any detail she might have missed, any clue that could explain how suspicion had fallen on her so quickly. More than anything, she craved understanding. But even more, she wanted her name cleared. As sleep finally claimed her, Emily couldn't help but feel that the world's judgment was harsher than anything she'd ever faced before, and that it had only just begun. Silent suspicion. The days following the scandal bled together in a quiet agony. Emily drifted through the halls of Maplewood High like a ghost, feeling the weight of every sidelong glance, every sudden silence when she entered a room. The investigation, if it could be called that, had yielded nothing concrete. Still, suspicion clung to her like an old, unwashable stain. The sense of isolation was no longer a distant ache. It was a tangible wall, closing in on her every side. She tried at first to convince herself that things would blow over the way school dramas always did. Rumors came and went. People found new topics to obsess over. But as each day passed, the tension around her only seemed to grow. Teachers who had once smiled neutrally now looked through her, their praise reserved for other students. Her few remaining acquaintances gave her a wide berth. Even the cashier in the school cafeteria hesitated while handing Emily her change, eyes darting over her shoulder as if searching for someone else to hold responsible for the day's troubles. The strangest part wasn't the loneliness. Emily had grown accustomed to solitude long before the Parkers ever called her their own. It was the undercurrent of something darker, a sensation that she was being watched, evaluated, not only by her classmates, but by someone with a keen interest in her downfall. The rumors never truly died down. They simply mutated, as though constantly being fed by an invisible hand. One afternoon, Emily lingered by her locker, pretending to search for a missing pen. She watched as Jessica swept past with a group of friends, her laughter cutting through the ambient noise like a bell. Their eyes briefly met. Jessica's look was unreadable, calm, even generous, but with a flicker of calculation behind her smile. Emily shivered. Jessica had been unusually attentive since the incident, offering half-hearted encouragement and rehearsed concern for the benefit of their parents. Private, however, she kept her distance, circling Emily with glances that were both sympathetic and wary. Emily thought back over the events of that disastrous Tuesday, replaying each detail with mounting frustration. She remembered being early to biology class, the teacher's voice sharp with suspicion, the missing answer key, the laughter behind her as she left the lunchroom. It all seemed oddly coordinated, almost as if the timing had been designed. She noted the way Olivia Markham, usually a leader in the whispering cliques, had started turning her back when Emily approached. There was a cold precision to the way rumors spread, as if someone orchestrated the choreography. But who would want to harm her? That question hovered over her every night as she lay in bed. The distant sounds of Jessica's late-night phone calls leaking through the thin wall that separated their rooms. Could it possibly be her own sister? The thought was too cruel. Jessica, who had always played the role of the golden child, would never stoop so low. Or would she? Emily remembered Jessica's poised encouragement, always delivered in front of Sheila and David, and how abruptly that warmth would vanish behind closed doors. The realization unsettled her, but Emily couldn't ignore the inconsistencies that kept surfacing. For example, she recalled seeing Jessica in the hallway near the faculty lounge that morning, the same lounge that was ransacked hours later. Jessica had been tapping away at her phone, but when she saw Emily notice her, she hurried off with an excuse about a meeting with a teacher. Was it coincidence or something more? Unable to resist her growing sense of suspicion, Emily began to keep a mental log of small anomalies. She paid closer attention to her sister's behavior. The extra time Jessica spent alone after school, the way her phone always seemed to light up with messages when Emily walked into the room, the sudden and subtle changes in her parents' attitude whenever Jessica talked with them privately. Fueled now by a strange mix of fear and determination, Emily started to look for tangible evidence. She began to jot down notes in a spiral-bound notebook, a habit she justified, even to herself, as a way of keeping her mind clear. She listed out names, times, places, basic facts about the day of the incident, and anyone who might possibly have witnessed something helpful. The process gave her a small but essential sense of agency. It was the first time since the accusations started that she felt like she was doing something, no matter how minor, to fight back. Her attention to detail paid off sooner than she expected. One Thursday morning, as she stood at her locker gathering her books, Emily noticed a group of students huddled close together, giggling over something on a phone. The screen flickered with images. Screenshots from the school's security cameras, it appeared. The angle was grainy and unflattering, but it was definitely the hallway outside the faculty lounge. As Emily strained to listen, she picked out her own name. "That's her," one of them said. "But look at the timestamp. It's before anything happened." That simple comment sent a jolt of adrenaline through Emily's veins. If she could get hold of the full footage, she might be able to clear her name, or at least prove she hadn't been near the scene when the accident occurred. It was a thin hope, but it was more than she'd had in days. That afternoon, Emily visited the library under the pretense of working on a research paper. She found Mrs. Torres, the librarian, who always treated her with a quiet kindness. "Excuse me, Mrs. Torres," Emily asked, her voice tentative. "Do you know if it's possible to review the school's security tapes? Just for the hallways, someone mentioned they saw me on one, but I don't remember being there at that time." Mrs. Torres frowned thoughtfully. "That's usually handled by the administration. Are you in some kind of trouble, Emily?" The conversation left Emily both optimistic and anxious, but her brief surge of courage quickly faded as she left the library. She caught sight of Jessica down the hallway, deep in conversation with one of the guidance counselors. As their eyes met, Jessica smiled, wide and composed, the living image of innocence. Emily couldn't decide if it was comforting or menacing. That night, Emily lay awake, imagining endless scenarios of confrontation and vindication. What if she was wrong about Jessica? What if this was all some terrible misunderstanding? The uncertainty gnawed at her, dragging her thoughts in endless circles. Yet she also felt something fierce rising up inside, a desperate need to reclaim her voice, to prove she was more than every ugly rumor whispered behind her back. As the days turned into weeks and the atmosphere around her grew ever more brittle, Emily's silent suspicion found an anchor. She knew she wasn't crazy. Someone was orchestrating these shadows, preying on her vulnerability and her place on the fringe. She resolved, quietly and stubbornly, that she would not remain a victim. Not anymore. With her suspicion sharpened, her trust narrowed to a tiny circle, Emily prepared herself for whatever came next, whatever truth, however shattering, awaited her at its end. Seeking justice, Emily woke that Friday with a resolve she had never felt before. Determination hummed beneath her skin, stronger than the fear and humiliation that had followed her these past weeks. The idea that someone, maybe even her own sister, was controlling the narrative of her life filled her with a sense of urgency. She could no longer sit quietly and hope the truth would emerge on its own. If she wanted justice, she would have to chase it herself. Her first step was to organize everything she knew. She cleared her desk, shut her bedroom door, and opened the blue spiral notebook she'd started a week ago. Inside, she mapped out every fact she could recall about the day of the so-called incident. The time she entered the hallway, who she saw, the missing answer key, the scavenged skeleton, the stairs in the cafeteria. She added notes about Jessica's whereabouts and odd behaviors, her presence near the faculty lounge, her strange eagerness to play the supportive sister, the quick exchange with the guidance counselor. Emily recognized the weight of what she was doing. The thought of possibly accusing Jessica still twisted her stomach with dread. For years, she had dreamed of a sister she could confide in, one who would see her as an equal, not an outsider. Now, as evidence seemed to nudge her in a dark direction, Emily's heart flickered between hope and sorrow. But she owed it to herself to find out the truth, no matter whom it implicated. Her plan was deliberate, but cautious. She decided not to confront anyone prematurely. Instead, she would collect as much evidence as she could, and only reveal her findings if she could piece together a clear, undeniable timeline. Investigation, notes, voices, and footprints. Step 1. Digital trails. Emily scrolled through her text messages, group chats, and emails from the day of the incident. She looked for any clues, changes in tone, sudden unexplained messages, or anything unusual about Jessica's communications. She noticed that right after the biology class fiasco, Jessica's messages in the family group chat became oddly supportive, as if anticipating fallout for Emily. She tracked the times of each message and compared them to what she remembered of Jessica's movements. A pattern began to emerge. Every time a new rumor flared at school, Jessica seemed to text someone quickly, fingers tapping away behind the screen of her phone. Then Emily dug deeper. She remembered, belatedly, that she'd left her phone's voice recorder running during study hall the day of the incident, intending to save parts of a group discussion for later review. Heart racing, she scanned through the file. Mostly, it was snippets of muted conversation, the low shuffle of books. But one exchange stood out, a whisper, almost inaudible, between two students plotting, "She'll take the blame, trust me." Emily played the moment over and over, amplifying the sound and isolating the voices. One sounded eerily like Olivia Markham, a close friend of Jessica's, though Emily couldn't be absolutely sure. Still, it was enough to widen her suspicion. She transferred the audio clip to her laptop, storing a backup in case her phone, accidentally, went missing. Seeking allies, Emily debated sharing her discoveries with a teacher, but hesitated. She needed someone objective, someone not likely to dismiss her as a bitter adopted sister. She remembered Mrs. Waller, the school psychologist, who was known for her kindness and patient ear. Emily emailed her, simply asking if they could talk about some trouble fitting in. She didn't dare mention the investigation yet. When they met in Mrs. Waller's sunlit office that afternoon, nerves tangled in Emily's chest. She hesitated, then told her story, not accusing Jessica, but laying out the chain of events, the rumors, the feeling that someone was setting her up. Mrs. Waller listened closely, hands folded, and nodded. "Emily, sometimes when students feel unheard, people underestimate what they go through. You're not alone in this. Let's work through the facts together," she said, With encouragement, Emily shared her notebook and the strange audio clip. They agreed to approach the administration with a request for the hallway security footage. Using Mrs. Waller's authority as leverage, Emily left the office with a tentative sense of hope. It was her first taste of an adult genuinely listening, not just nodding along, piecing together the puzzle. Meanwhile, Emily kept up her detective work at home. She watched Jessica carefully, taking mental notes of every interaction. Jessica's composure was near flawless. She'd mastered the art of looking concerned in front of their parents, offering to help with chores, asking after Emily's day, much more than usual. But when the adults' backs were turned, her praise would flatten into indifferent shrugs, and every attempt at sisterly intimacy was met with chilly distance. Emily's new wariness made her sensitive to details. Jessica's hurried, whispered calls when she thought no one was nearby. Her secrecy with her phone, which never left her hand. One evening, Emily overheard Jessica talking to Olivia in the backyard. She pressed her ear to the screen door, careful not to breathe too loud. "She's getting nosy, Liv. I think she's on to something," Jessica said, her voice edged with annoyance and a hint of fear. "If anyone asks, stick to the story. She's the outsider. Nobody will believe her anyway." Emily's stomach dropped, but her resolve hardened. Connecting the final dots, that weekend, with Mrs. Waller's help, Emily was allowed a supervised viewing of the relevant security tapes. They huddled beside the aging screen in the vice principal's office, nerves taut. There, clear as day, the footage showed Emily walking past the faculty lounge, alone and before the room was trashed. The timestamp contradicted rumors placing her at the scene during the chaos. Another section showed Jessica hesitating near the lounge with Olivia, glancing furtively before ducking out of camera range. The puzzle pieces clicked into place. Emily had the beginnings of an airtight case: time-stamped footage, a suspicious audio whisper implicating her primary bully, and circumstantial evidence suggesting Jessica used her popularity and influence to silently manipulate both students and adults, preparing for the next step. Armed with evidence and a new sense of purpose, Emily gathered her findings in a folder. Wasn't yet proof beyond any doubt, but she'd built a compelling foundation for her defense and, perhaps more importantly, a confrontation. For the first time since the nightmare began, Emily felt control returning to her life. She knew there would be backlash when she exposed the truth. There would be tears and anger, strained family dinners, and broken friendships.
Yes, we do.
But justice wasn't about protecting comfort. It was about reclaiming dignity. As Emily sat in her quiet room, the folder of evidence resting heavy on her lap, she reminded herself, this wasn't just about clearing her name. It was about finding her voice and standing up against the shadows that had ruled her life for far too long. Justice was within reach. Now, it was up to Emily to decide how and when to reveal it to the world. Painful truth, Emily's heart hammered in her chest as the facts began to settle into a devastating pattern. The further she chased each breadcrumb of evidence, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a case of unfortunate rumors or careless misunderstandings. This was deliberate. She had wanted so badly to believe she was wrong, to give Jessica the benefit of the doubt, to trust in the bond she had worked so hard to build since the day she arrived at the Parkers. But now, with every timestamp, every whispered conversation, every guarded look between Jessica and her friends, denial collapsed under the weight of reality. That Saturday morning, the Parker house was silent. Sunlight crept across Emily's comforter, but did nothing to warm her restless thoughts. She lay staring at the ceiling, replaying the smallest of moments. Jessica borrowing her favorite sweater a week ago, calling her sis at dinner, pressing gentle questions about the investigation when their parents were within earshot. All of it had seemed affectionate at the time. Subtle efforts to include her, to make her feel less alone. Now, Emily realized each word, every gesture, was calculated to reinforce her role as the grateful outsider, too meek and mild to cause trouble. She got up and went through her notes again, this time searching for what she might have missed. The evidence was indisputable. Jessica had orchestrated the day's events with chilling precision. She'd added fuel to gossip with a single well-placed message, nudged Olivia and the others to play their parts, and ensured that suspicion would always point to Emily instead of circling back to Maplewood High's golden child. A wave of betrayal washed over her, a pain so sharp and deep she thought she might cry out. But no tears came. Instead, Emily felt a cold, steady clarity begin to bloom beneath the heartbreak. She recognized, at last, the simple and excruciating truth. Jessica had never wanted her as a sister at all. The rest of the day passed in a daze. She drifted around the house, watching every interaction with new eyes. Jessica was flawless, as always, flashing a bright smile for Sheila and David, offering to help make lunch, settling in with textbooks, and a hum of pop music trailing from her headphones. To anyone else, she was the perfect daughter, the kind of girl who could never, ever do wrong. But Emily noticed the cracks, the quick glances to make sure she watched, the way Jessica's fingers tightened on her phone, and the too smooth way she greeted their parents with stories of a classmate's misfortune. Emily stayed silent at lunch, barely tasting the grilled cheese Sheila pressed on her. The table was filled with casual conversation and Jessica's laughter, but beneath every word, Emily sensed the chasm between herself and the rest of the Parkers. She wondered, for the first time, if it would ever shrink. Later that afternoon, as tension wound tighter around her chest, she sat on her bed and wrote a letter to herself. A confession, a kind of exorcism for the guilt and sorrow rising inside her. You are not unworthy. You did nothing wrong. The fault is theirs, hers, for what she did, and theirs, for not seeing you. Your pain is real. You deserve the truth, injustice, even if it tears everything apart. Don't let them erase your story. Writing the words made her hands shake, but also brought a fragile sense of peace. Emily considered, quietly, what she would do next. Telling Sheila and David meant risking the tiny bit of belonging she clung to. Revealing the truth at school would mean turning herself into a spectacle. It was a lose-lose proposition, either way. But protecting Jessica, letting the lie fester and grow, would mean sacrificing herself. In the quiet of her room, Emily realized that justice would never be painless. The next steps would hurt, not just for her, but for everyone involved. Still, she kept circling back to the same thought. Whatever the cost, it was time for the truth to be known. Evening fell, and the Parker family gathered in the living room for their usual weekend movie night. Emily sat on the sofa's edge, heart thudding wildly, unable to focus on the screen. She watched the shadows play across Jessica's serene face, felt the weight of silence grow until it swallowed her. Near the end of the movie, Emily excused herself and fled upstairs, locking her door behind her. Alone, she scrolled through her phone, reading messages from classmates, some taunting, some cautiously sympathetic, most ignoring the real pain hidden beneath the surface. She opened her folder, reviewing screenshots, audio files, and security footage. For what felt like the 1,000th time, something still nagged at her. Did Sheila and David know their own daughter so little? Would they believe the truth? Or would Jessica's perfection blind them to it, as it had everyone else? As midnight approached, a soft knock sounded on her door. Emily's heart jumped. "Em, it's Jess." The voice was gentle, almost pleading. "Can we talk?" Emily hesitated, then opened the door. Jessica stepped inside. Her face, the picture of sisterly concern. "You've been really quiet lately. Are you okay?" The words sounded sincere, but the memory of whispered plans and rehearsed concern dangled dangerously between them. For a moment, Emily ached, to reach out, to believe that Jessica's callousness could be explained or redeemed. But the evidence was too strong, the betrayal too fresh. "I just need some space," Emily replied, voice trembling. "A lot's been happening." Jessica nodded, her smile slipping just a fraction. She studied Emily for a long moment, then left, leaving the door open behind her. As footsteps drifted down the hall, Emily pressed her palms to her eyes, willing herself not to cry. It was unbearable to know the person who had worked so hard to destroy her could still disarm with a look, a word, a practiced kindness. The next morning, the air in the house was brittle with unspoken words. Emily watched Jessica go through the motions, setting the table, sharing weekend plans, expertly managing the family's emotions as if nothing at all were wrong. But Emily saw now that Jessica's confidence was laced with wariness. Perhaps, Emily thought, she sensed the foundation cracking. Hidden in her room, Emily pulled out her notebook once more. She listed everything: painful memories, flashes of anger, moments when she almost spoke up. And after each entry, she wrote. The next days were a blur of nerves and resolve. Emily attended classes, careful and observant. Teachers still regarded her with thinly veiled suspicion, and classmates pretended to smile. But she noticed the split-second hesitation before they turned away. It didn't matter now. She had made her decision. No matter how much it hurt, the truth needed to come out. Justice and healing could only begin when all the shadows had been named and faced. Emily was ready at last to step out of the role she had been assigned, the outsider, the scapegoat, the silent observer, and become the narrator of her own story. The truth was painful, but hiding it would only let the wound fester. Soon, everyone would know what had really happened at Maplewood High, and who Emily Parker truly was, beneath the stain that would not fade. The retaliation plan. Sunday dawned gray and damp, clouds pressing low over the Parker house as Emily sat awake at her desk. A new sensation pulsed inside her. Not just hurt, not just betrayal, but a focused intent. For weeks, she had been the subject of rumor and shadow. Now, finally, the time had come to step from her role as a silent victim and take control of her own fate. Justice was her goal, but that alone would not suffice. She needed her voice back, and that meant a meticulously planned retaliation. Not revenge, but restoration of truth. Emily began by cataloging her evidence, spreading it across her desk as methodically as any detective. Security footage, audio files, screen captures of damning messages, and a timeline of events all lay before her, weighted with significance. She organized everything into a folder, labeling each exhibit and cross-referencing dates and times on her notepad. The night before, she had barely slept, working through each detail with painstaking care to ensure that her case was bulletproof. She knew what was at stake. If she failed, she would only solidify her role as the scapegoat, lose the last threads of trust she'd managed to hang on to, and perhaps close the door forever with the Parkers. But self-doubt clung to her, stubborn and relentless. Could she really go through with it? Should she? The nuclear option, exposing Jessica not just to her family, but to the entire school, would change both of their lives forever. It would mean more humiliation, more whispers, and anger from those who might see her actions as an attack on the golden child. But the choice was no longer about comfort. It was survival. Emily knew that timing was everything. The school's graduation ceremony was approaching within the week, a day when almost every student, parent, and teacher would be in attendance. With emotions running high and all eyes on the seniors, it would be the most public and powerful opportunity to reveal the truth. She penciled the date on her calendar and circled it in red. Graduation would be the stage for her reckoning. Before that, however, she needed to shore up her support. Mrs. Waller, the school psychologist, had already lent a sympathetic ear and facilitated her review of the security footage. Now, Emily scheduled another meeting, determined this time to lay out her full evidence and ask for guidance. That Monday, her stomach twisted as she knocked on Mrs. Waller's door. Inside, sunlight slanted on a wall covered in motivational posters. Emily slid into a chair and took a shaky breath. "I need your help," she said, her voice trembling with both dread and determination. I think I have everything I need to prove that I'm innocent, and I can prove Jessica set me up." Mrs. Waller studied her quietly, then motioned for her to continue. Emily showed her the audio file, the time-stamped security footage, the digital trails of Jessica's orchestrations, and the notes she had compiled. There was a long, heavy pause as Mrs. Waller reviewed each piece. "You have a strong case, Emily," she finally acknowledged, eyes gentle and grave. "But this is going to hurt. Not just you. Jessica, the Parkers, the school. Are you prepared for that fallout?" Emily swallowed. "I don't want to destroy anyone. But if I do nothing, nothing will ever change. I want the truth out, and I want to move forward with my life." Mrs. Waller nodded. "I'll be here for you. When you're ready, let's approach the administration together. I'll help ensure you're treated fairly." Relief mingled with anxiety as Emily left the office. She knew Mrs. Waller's support would give her testimony weight with the principal and other faculty. Even so, she anticipated obstacles. Jessica's circle of influence extended through much of the school's staff and students. It would take courage to see her plan through. The rest of the week, Emily became a master observer. At home, Jessica's demeanor bordered on icy caution one moment and overblown kindness the next. Emily watched as her adoptive sister checked her phone obsessively, held whispered conversations with Olivia, and prepared for graduation as though nothing could touch her. Sheila and David, ever doting, praised Jessica's achievements and future prospects, rarely giving Emily more than a token nod. Emily felt a pang each time their parents failed to see the tension simmering under Jessica's surface. On Wednesday, Emily quietly gathered digital backups of all her evidence. She encrypted key files and emailed them to Mrs. Waller in case anything happened to her devices. More than once, she caught Jessica watching her with narrowed suspicion, as though she sensed that her control was evaporating. The house felt like a powder keg, each polite interaction barely hiding explosive resentment. At school, whispers sometimes died when Emily entered a room. But as the days wore on, she also caught the occasional furtive glance of curiosity or sympathy. Rumors morphed unpredictably. Some students speculated she had run afoul of a teacher. Others claimed she was planning a stunt. Olivia and her friends, meanwhile, perfected the art of subtle intimidation. Casual elbow bumps in the hall, staged laughter, and the deliberate exclusion of Emily from every celebration. Emily made careful notes of everything. Her determination was sharpened by each slight, each wordless act of hostility. She knew some would never see her as more than a foster child, a temporary guest in the Parker family. But soon, her story, the real story, would be impossible to ignore. The night before graduation, tension reached its peak. Emily could hardly eat dinner as Sheila and David chattered about decorations and post-ceremony brunch. Jessica stayed mostly silent, eyes flicking constantly toward Emily, as if gauging her readiness for confrontation. When the family retreated for the night, Emily sat on her bed, folder in hand, rehearsing how she would present her case to the school administration the following morning. The simple act of reading her timeline aloud felt like reclaiming lost ground and smoothing out the bruises that the past month had painted on her sense of worth. That night, she barely slept. The clock ticked on, each minute stretching with questions and worry. Could she go through with it? Would anyone listen? What would become of her family? Yet beneath those questions ran a current of strength she hadn't known she possessed. She had survived silence, survived suspicion. Now was her chance to turn both into a shield and a sword. Before dawn, Emily dressed and slipped into the kitchen, making herself a silent promise. No matter what happened, her life would no longer be defined by someone else's lies. Graduation would mark not just an end, but a beginning, one where her own voice rang out, clear and undeniable at last. The night before graduation settled over Maplewood like a heavy, expectant hush. Thunderheads menaced the sky in sullen bruises of gray. But inside the Parkers' home, the tension was thicker than the humid air pressing at the windows. Emily sat cross-legged on her bed, her folder of meticulously gathered evidence spread out before her, like tarot cards, foretelling a future she both craved and feared. Downstairs, the family dinner had played out with unnatural cheerfulness. Sheila and David flitted between talk of Jessica's valedictorian speech, last-minute outfit fittings, and the logistics of hosting out-of-town guests. Jessica herself was the picture of composed anticipation, smiling brightly when spoken to, her movements precise, her energy wound tight as a violin string. Whenever their parents looked away, her gaze darted over Emily, calculating, faintly mocking, but above all, wary. Emily barely spoke. Each time she tried to respond to a question about tomorrow, "Are you excited for the ceremony, sweetheart?" Her words stuck in her throat. The weight of what she intended to do sat on her chest, an invisible boulder flattening every syllable. Instead, she let Sheila interpret her silence as nerves and spent most of the meal pushing food in circles on her plate. As dusk fell, Emily watched Jessica float from room to room, fielding texts and calls from friends, each conversation laden with inside jokes and reassurances. Occasionally, laughter would burst from her lips, sharp, brittle, as though the sound itself was a battle cry. Emily recognized the strategy. Command the space, control the narrative, give nothing away. But amidst the bravado, Emily spotted fissures. A flinch when Olivia's name appeared on her screen. A hesitation when Emily lingered nearby. A coldness in her voice when she thought she wasn't being overheard. Later, under the pretense of organizing her things for the morning, Emily retreated to her bedroom. She set her alarm for an early hour, knowing sleep would come fitfully, if at all. Her phone buzzed with a mixture of messages. Some were generic encouragements from teachers or classmates. "Tomorrow's the big day. You'll do great." But a few were tinged with suspicion or coded malice. remnants of the rumors that still stalked her every move. She ignored them. With the house quiet, Emily reopened her folder. She reread her notes, reviewed the timeline, double-checked her digital evidence. Each piece felt like both a shield and a blade, proof she wasn't crazy, yet evidence that could shatter the fragile surface of her family life for good. She thumbed a sticky note she'd written earlier. From the hallway, echoes of Jessica's laughter rose and fell, chasing away Emily's temporary calm. She caught bits of a conversation through the vent. Jessica, joking about graduation gifts. Then, lowering her voice to a sharp whisper Emily couldn't quite make out. For an irrational moment, Emily envisioned her sister plotting a last-minute defense, manipulating the chessboard before the truth could be revealed. The realization stung. Trust between them was dead, replaced now by a clinical dance of suspicion and strategy. Unable to sit still, Emily wandered to the window and pressed her forehead to the glass. The town was awash in the flickering glow of porch lights. Each house, she imagined, containing families preparing for tomorrow's celebration. Somewhere, she told herself, other kids must feel lucky, safe, wanted. For a moment, she allowed herself to mourn the life she'd wanted with the Parkers. The fantasy of unconditional acceptance, of finally belonging without question. That dream had become smoke. Now, only truth would do. As the hour grew late, she lay back on her bed, staring at the ceiling. The swirl of unresolved emotions threatened to drown her. Anger at being scapegoated, grief for what she had lost, dread for what was about to happen, and a thin, stubborn thread of hope that everything might be rebuilt, even if it had to be torn apart first. She pictured graduation, faces in the crowd, the stilted applause, Jessica's practiced charm, and then her own voice, measured and unwavering, disrupting the script once and for all. A sudden knock startled her. Jessica stood in the doorway, her silhouette framed by the soft golden light of the hallway. "You're still awake," she observed, voice even, lips curled in that old, familiar half-smile. "Big day tomorrow." Emily nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Jessica lingered, gaze sharp. "Are you nervous about something? You've seemed really on edge." The tension between them was palpable, a drawn wire ready to snap. For a heartbeat, Emily was tempted to say everything, to confront her right then and there. But she held back, voice barely above a whisper. "Just tired, that's all." Jessica's lips tightened. "Well, try not to mess up tomorrow, okay? Mom and Dad have gone through a lot for this." The warning, barely disguised as sisterly concern, sliced the air. Before Emily could reply, Jessica turned and disappeared down the hall, closing her door, perhaps for the last time, as the perfect daughter. Emily let out a shaky breath. Tomorrow, all the games would end. Unable to sleep, she sat at her desk and wrote a letter, not for anyone else, but for herself. She needed, desperately, to hear her own truth echoed back. Whatever tomorrow brings, you have done the right thing. You have survived worse than whispers, harder than exclusion, colder than indifference. Your voice matters. If this is the way you finally become seen, then so be it. You are not small. You are not what they say. She folded the note and slipped it in her pocket. Outside, a faint roll of thunder promised rain for the morning. The last thing Emily did before crawling into bed was set out her graduation clothes and the folder of evidence. She placed the folder on top, visible, undeniable, as much a part of her as the gown she'd wear. In the darkness, she curled beneath the covers, bracing herself for the storm that was sure to break. In those quiet hours before dawn, Emily let herself grieve for the family that could have been, and gathered every piece of strength for the one final battle ahead. No matter what tomorrow held, acceptance, rejection, justice, or ruin, she would step onto that stage as herself at last. Exposing the truth, the sun had barely broken through the clouds as cars spilled into the Maplewood High parking lot, each carrying anticipation, pride, and in Emily's case, a secret that threatened to overshadow every cap and gown. Graduation day should have promised a clean slate, a celebration of years endured. For Emily, it felt like the last stand. She arrived early, clutching her backpack not just for comfort, but for what it carried. The folder, thick with careful notes, time-stamped screenshots, audio clips, and security video summaries. Her hands were cold. Her heartbeat surged with every new arrival. At home that morning, Sheila had tied Jessica's sash with trembling fingers, while David hovered in the background, his words clipped, his smile forced. Jessica barely looked at Emily, but when she did, a flicker of warning passed between them, as sharp as ice. Emily responded only with a steady gaze. She was done hiding. The gym thrummed with nervous energy, echoing with laughter and last-minute whispers. Parents filled the bleachers, craning for a glimpse of their children in the procession. Teachers milled about, organizing the soon-to-be graduates, not knowing that this ceremony would end so differently from all the rest. The ceremony began as every graduation does. Speeches, applause, the shuffling of programs. The valedictorians practiced words about community and integrity. Jessica stood at the podium, radiant, her address perfectly delivered. Yet from her vantage point, Emily could see the tension beneath Jessica's poise. A white-knuckled grip on the speech cards, an anxious dart of her eyes toward Emily. Their parents beamed, oblivious to the truth, brewing just below the surface. The procession continued. Graduates called one by one, hands shaken, diplomas exchanged. When Emily's name rang out, she walked up with her head high and her expression calm, despite the storm within. She accepted her diploma and was ushered back to her seat, but her appointed moment was still to come. When the principal, Mrs. Harwood, approached the microphone for closing remarks, Emily took a breath that felt like fire in her lungs. Quietly, she made her way toward the stage. Her feet felt heavy, like rising from quicksand. The rising buzz of confusion almost drowned out her own resolve. Mrs. Harwood, expecting this, nodded slightly. She had agreed to give Emily space to speak, especially after Mrs. Waller's discreet advocacy in the days before. Emily gripped the microphone, the auditorium's lights painting her in sharp relief against the dark rows of onlookers. She hesitated only an instant. Then she began. "I know this isn't usual," she said, her voice echoing loud and clear. "But I need to speak before we all leave here today. I haven't had many chances to tell my side of things, and for a while, I thought staying silent would make everything better. I was wrong." A ripple of unease swept the room. Jessica sat frozen, lips pressed white, eyes unblinking. In the past few weeks, a lot was said about me, about things that happened at this school, things that were broken and stolen. Most people assumed it was true. Maybe because I'm quieter, maybe because I've always felt like the outsider. She met her parents' eyes. Sheila's mouth parted. David looked uncertain, as if bracing for disaster. Emily opened her folder, pulling out the evidence. But I have proof that those stories weren't true. I brought security footage and messages, some sent by people in this room, showing I wasn't where those things happened. And there are recordings of conversations about how to make sure everyone blamed me. Voices erupted, first in disbelief, then anger, some parents scoffing, students whispering behind their hands, a handful of teachers exchanging glances. If anyone wants to doubt me, I invite you. Please look at the truth for yourself. Everything is here. Emily's hands shook as she handed the folder to Mrs. Waller, who had come to stand by her side, offering silent encouragement. My only mistake was staying quiet, believing I had to accept the role everyone assigned me. But the truth is, someone I trusted, someone many of you admire, created those lies. Her gaze rested on Jessica, holding it steady until even Jessica had to look away. Mrs. Waller, steadying the scene with her familiar calm, addressed the crowd. All students deserve a fair hearing. I've seen the evidence myself. This deserves to be reviewed by staff, by parents, by everyone who cares about the truth. For a moment, the gym hung in suspended disbelief. The room was a tapestry of reactions. Some students gaped in shock, others angrily scrolled through their phones. A few teachers wore grim expressions, as if chiding themselves for never challenging the obvious story. Jessica's close friends, Olivia and the others, exchanged guilty glances, growing paler with realization. Jessica's mask finally cracked. She shrank in her chair, her carefully practiced confidence melting into a mixture of terror and shame. When her name was quietly murmured among students and teachers, a few in disbelief, more in anger or disappointment, the Parker family realized their world was being remade. Sheila burst into tears, her hand covering her mouth in horror as she processed both the gravity of Emily's evidence and her own blindness to Jessica's deceit. David squeezed Emily's shoulder for the first time, not out of duty, but out of genuine apology. His eyes glossed with regret. It took only minutes for the mood to shift. Where there was skepticism and denial, certainty crept in as Mrs. Waller distributed copies of the most damning screenshots and video stills to the principal and a few faculty heads. Parents who had raised their voices now sat stunned, murmuring apologies. Students who had taunted Emily now watched her not as a scapegoat, but as someone who had bravely refused to remain silent under impossible pressure. Within the hour, Jessica was ushered into a quiet side hallway with her parents and Mrs. Waller. The confrontation was tearful and raw. Jessica's denial quickly crumbled under the details Emily provided. There was no storm of rage, just a broken acceptance, the slow unraveling of pretense as Jessica finally admitted what she had done. Emily walked out of the gymnasium alone, but lighter, a survivor, not a ghost. She had exposed the truth, not just for her own sake, but for everyone who had ever watched injustice and said nothing. The wound was fresh, but as sunlight broke fully outside, casting long golden beams onto the battered parking lot, Emily finally felt what she had waited for years to feel. Seen, heard, and, at last, free from the shadows. Stepping out of the shadows. The morning after graduation, the world seemed oddly muted, no longer haunted by storm clouds, but neither shining with the clarity Emily had hoped for. Sunlight filtered gray and soft through her window as she lay awake, listening to the quiet hum of the Parker household. The house, so often brimming with Jessica's laughter and the persistent soundtrack of suburban life, now seemed to hold its breath along with her. Downstairs, the remnants of celebration lingered. A stray balloon, forgotten congratulations cards, empty cups clustered on the counter. But these were physical echoes. What remained in the air was something colder, heavier, and impossible to sweep into a trash bag. Last night's revelations at graduation had cracked open years of family routine, exposing vulnerability, guilt, and wounds too fresh for easy words. Emily rose and dressed quietly, every movement measured. She was not the same girl who had cowered at kitchen tables or deferred to her sister's shadow. Yet, while the truth was now out, she carried no sense of triumph, just a deep, aching fatigue and a strange, pulsing hope. In the kitchen, Sheila sat clutching a cup of untouched coffee, her eyes swollen from a night's worth of tears. David hovered nearby, restless, as if searching for something to fix, but finding only silence. Jessica's absence pressed down on the room. She had locked herself in her bedroom after the ceremony. Her pride and poise finally surrendered to grief. Emily paused at the doorway. The conversation that followed was stilted and full of pauses. Sheila tried to apologize, voice rough with regret, recounting all the ways she and David should have noticed the signs, while David simply said, "We're sorry, Em, for a lot of things." Emily listened, accepting their sorrow, but found herself unable to offer simple forgiveness. Not yet, but for the first time, she sensed their words were not for appearances. They saw her pain, raw and real, and there was relief in no longer having to beg for recognition. The news of what happened at graduation spread quickly. By midday, texts pinged across Emily's phone. Some tentative apologies from classmates, others simply stunned silence. Those who had once excluded her now hesitated before speaking, their eyes uncertain, haunted by the memory of her unwavering voice standing alone on stage. Emily responded to only a few, unwilling to perform absolution for people who had chosen the comfort of indifference over truth. Still, a handful of new faces sought her out in quiet hallways, offering not just pity, but genuine support. For the first time, she realized that being known was not always a punishment. Jessica's fate, within the family and at school, remained uncertain. Administration began a formal process, and rumors churned at the edges of the student body. But Emily steered clear of the maelstrom. Some instinct told her that vengeance was not liberation. The victory she needed was not in seeing Jessica fall, but in reclaiming her own future without the burden of injustice clinging to her skin. On the third day, Jessica emerged, eyes red, chin trembling, and asked to speak privately. They sat stiffly on the edge of Emily's bed, silence stretching between them. When Jessica finally spoke, her confession tumbled out in broken syllables. Anger, jealousy, the crushing pressure to be perfect, and the easy way it had always been to let Emily bear the blame. There was no defense, no excuses, just a desperate plea to be understood. Tears streaked down both their cheeks as Jessica admitted, "I don't know how to fix any of this, but I am sorry." Emily listened. She did not offer absolution, but something subtle shifted. The wound was still raw, but she realized that her sister's pain did not erase her own. "We can't undo what was done," Emily said quietly, "but we can try to change what happens next." It didn't promise reconciliation, but it opened a door neither thought could be unlocked. In the following weeks, Emily's daily life remained unsettled, but not unbearable. She found herself walking the sprawling suburban streets she'd once viewed with suspicion, earbuds in, letting music drown out rumors and old memories. She reached out to Mrs. Waller, grateful for the school psychologist's unwavering belief, and agreed to attend a support group for transfer students and adoptees. Within that circle, Emily heard echoes of her own loneliness in the stories of others, and it soothed her. The knowledge that isolation was not uniquely hers. Slowly, she rebuilt connections with her adoptive parents. Family dinners became less about Jessica's achievements and more about sharing honest conversations. Sheila and David asked about her interests, her love of old photography, her desire to write, and listened, really listened, in a way they never had. Though awkward at first, these exchanges pieced together the trust that had once been shattered. There would never be perfection, but at last, there was space to be seen on her own terms. At school, Emily walked the halls head high. Some classmates still averted their eyes. Others smiled, tentatively, as if asking for permission to begin again. She joined the yearbook club, channeling years of outsider observation into a sharp, empathetic voice that found beauty even in imperfections. It was in that creative work that she sensed the shadows falling away. Her story no longer dictated by others' expectations, but instead inked by her own hand. One afternoon, sitting beneath the leafy maple trees that lined the school's front lawn, Emily reflected on the phrase that had haunted her since her earliest memories of being adopted: worthy of love. She realized that she was not responsible for making herself invisible or for contorting to fit someone else's family portrait. She was, simply by existing and enduring, more resilient than she had ever believed. The end of summer approached. As the Parker family began making plans for fall, Jessica seeking therapy, Sheila volunteering at the school, David gingerly asking Emily if she'd like to pick out a new camera, they were, in fits and starts, knitting together something new and uncertain. There were setbacks, sharp words, awkward silences, but there were also moments of real warmth. A shared joke, a quiet apology, a night spent watching old movies without pretense. The day her official exoneration came from the school, Emily walked alone to the park, clutching the letter in her hand. She read it in the sunlight, feeling the truth of it settle in her bones, not just cleared of accusations, but vindicated for the courage to speak her truth. With a steadying breath, she looked up at the sky, wide, pale, and limitless. She did not need to be defined by shadows, nor by the mistakes of those who failed to see her. She was no longer merely surviving, but living, and perhaps, with time, the love she longed for would not be something she had to earn, but something freely given. With her heart lighter and her future finally her own, Emily walked forward, determined to carry her story, not as a burden, but as proof. Stepping out of the shadows wasn't the end. It was, at last, the beginning.